Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you're all doing well. I am Tosin, and I am a recent graduate and data engineer at Rockborn. So today I will be telling you about data storytelling, which is something I feel rather passionately about. Data storytelling, obviously, is something that isn't really talked about in the industry, and it's just a way in which we communicate data. So you may all be familiar with stories, as I expect you to be, because we have shared stories over generations. Stories are often how we communicate important messages with young people. But when that comes to data, that somewhat morphs, and it's how we have our communications in the most impactful way. So today I'm just going to tell you a bit about data storytelling, why I think it's impactful, and maybe some tips and tricks on how you, if you don't, how you should be data storytelling, and how to optimize that to make it the most productive communication that you can possibly. So, in data, the goal is to produce insights. So often I like to use the analogy which is in cooking. So you get the raw data, which is like gathering your ingredients. And then you have to clean the data and kind of get it into a state in which you can build some of the machine learning models and algorithms that we previously heard about, or get into the state where it's ready to be analyzed. So that's that little bit where you get all the ingredients out and you're going to weigh them, maybe get out your pots and pans and get everything ready. Then the analysis or the model building, that is really the transformation. So that would be your cooking. And then the insights is the food that you've produced. But then in order to communicate that and kind of turn that into storytelling, is what you want to do is put that onto a plate and present it to someone. So insights need to be communicated in a compelling way to yield change. And that is really what we want from data, because it's great having all this food in your cupboard, but if you're not really going to create meals and create something more meaningful out of it, then it's not really being utilized to its biggest potential. Often, some of our communications aren't as good as they could be or as you'd want them to be, and that's often because we're coming from different places. So that's something that we'll go on to explore throughout today's talk. As I mentioned, communication isn't always easy. Often we are coming a lot from where we come from in our communication, which is natural. I like to communicate in a certain way, so that's the way in which I communicate, because that's the way I like to be communicated with. But you also have to be very considerate of where other people are coming from. As I come from a tech background personally, I have been very intentional in learning the practices of translating some of the more abstract concepts into something that is really digestible and can be understood because it's in a layman's terms. And I use a lot of techniques in that, and some of which we'll discuss later on. So communicating isn't always easy, and sometimes we're communicating the wrong message. You have to be very clear about what your intentions are when you're communicating a message, especially when you've got a lot of data behind what you could potentially be saying. So this is something that I thought I'd bring to your attention, because this is data storytelling in one of its most raw forms. But there you can see two exact same visualizations. It's the same data, and the story has been told in two different ways. The image associated with Iraq's bloody toll is meant to evoke an emotion from you. And that's why they've chosen the colors red, and they've gone for a inverted visualization where it looks almost as if blood is dripping. And that's something that we can utilize in data storytelling to kind of make our message more impactful and share a message that really will bring about change in the audience. Whereas sometimes you want to frame your messages in a more neutral fashion. So if you look at the other visualization, you can see that deaths are on the decline. And that's kind of a different message. Despite having the exact same data, because of the way it's been displayed and the narrative that has been placed around it. And this is something we're going to really explore next. So obviously, we've just seen two different messages that I would say have been effectively communicated. And this is because they really had awareness of their intention and how to convey that by evoking emotion, or, for instance, by the lack of evoking emotion. So when it comes to data storytelling, there are three key things which I've kind of visualized for you here. You've got the data. This is really the backbone of everything going on. In data storytelling, without the data, it's just storytelling. So this is what everything should come back to and you should rely on. It's kind of, in music, it would be the bass line, the beat of the drum. That's what, it's there, but it's not always the focus, but it's something that just keeps the rhythm. You've got the narrative. And for this, for me, that's the context. That's what brings power to that data. You are often faced with a lot of data. This can be overwhelming. This is just a bunch of numbers. But it's the narrative which really makes your data powerful. And this is something that is used often in industry because there is so much data, big data, in fact. There's a wealth of it. And without the narrative and information surrounding that data and how it came about and how it could have application, which is greater than their data itself, that data is almost powerless. And then finally, you've got the visualizations. This is what kind of brings it all to life. Often when we are trying to communicate, it's hard to do so if things are quite stark. Visualizations bring excitement. They also bring a different way of conveying the same message. It's something that can support and even heighten the message that you're trying to convey. And as you can see here, there's a Venn diagram that I've comprised, which has these three elements placed, and there's intersections between them. So let's explore that. So with a narrative and visuals, you can engage, and that's like a traditional story. That's the intention. So you're just engaging, but there's nothing to back that up. There's nothing really to bring the truth of that situation. And then with data and narrative, you've got the explanation. So this is a story, but it wouldn't be necessarily a good one. This is where I'm telling you of something that's happened, and you are kind of just taking it for face value, and you're not really seeing the patterns or the trends that I'm trying to describe. But then there's also the point where there is data and a visualization, which can enlighten. That is something that's quite powerful because you've got the data behind there and you've got the visualization, which is exemplifying that. But the narrative, without that context, it's nothing more than a pretty picture, really. In that triple intersection there, that's where we've got change. And that's really what you want to aspire to and want to achieve within data, because that's the whole point of all the data that we're collecting currently and utilizing. Without change, whether that be action through change, or that could be in the place of the lack of action, or in the place of information being provided which informs further things. So that is really what we're looking for. So in order to yield that change, there are a few really important steps that I would recommend following. Bringing about your context, so that's your narrative, and developing that in a way that's not only natural for you as the person who's conveying that message, but natural to the person that's ingesting that message. You want to think about the flow and kind of how you can follow along with the journey. You want it to be almost as if it is a conventional story. You need to have that structure of the beginning, the middle, the end, and have those lines weaved within your narrative that show how the data has its importance and how it's been the reason that you've yielded this insight. Then you want to select effective visuals. Often when it comes to data, I'm sure you've all spent time in Excel and we've span up some charts and some different visualizations, but you want to think about what is the message you're trying to convey and how that is done most effectively. Sometimes including a wealth of data in its simplest form isn't that. Grouping data together and maybe seeing what comes from that maybe are more effective, and making sure that the visualizations that you're selecting to be used are fully understood by the person that you're providing the story to. And that's kind of like if you were to be presenting a book which had pictures in it, you'd want to have the pictures to truly be appreciated. So you want them in line with the flow of the story. You don't want the visualizations to be a distraction. You want it to aid you in the story that you're telling. And furthermore to that point, you want to maintain the focus on the story and on the data in your narrative and your visualization. So you don't want to bring about clutter. You don't want to have things that don't necessarily add to the story. Those would be maybe find its place in a report where you're writing up everything that could be concluded. But in your communications, it's at times tempting to talk about all that you've discovered, but it's more valuable to be actually talking about one line of your story. And then that's ensuring that you maintain focus on what your insights are, what change you want to bring about. By maintaining focus, it kind of creates a sense of importance, because if you're going to have a conversation with someone, no matter the duration, it could be 5 minutes to an hour. If you're talking about one point repetitively, that makes the point automatically seem more important, and through that nature it brings about change. And then maintaining the natural flow, as I prior mentioned, when you're telling a story, you need to have that flow, because that's what allows you to form connections. Often we talk about data in a way that really wants you to evoke emotions, because we know that that's the way that people often are jolted into action to bring about change. So having that flow is very instrumental in that, and having your story actually mean something. Because if you think of a storybook, you wouldn't have it go straight into the action and then just kind of pitter down from there. Though that may be effective for some stories, there's often a lot more going on. But when you're having a basic story, if you think back to potentially some of the bedtime stories we used to tell children, you kind of want to introduce the characters and build from that. And then from there, you're able to build more. And you want to always maintain a focus on certain characters and then come to a conclusion, because that's naturally how we ingest information the best. Sometimes there's a lot of excitement and you want to have the hard-hitting facts early on, and that can be an effective way, but you also need to be able to illustrate the story and the flow that you've gone through to come to that, because those can't stand alone. And last of all, I wanted to make sure that I drove this point home, because data is all about people. Though often it comes off as a very technical thing in which there's a lot of computers and AI and machine learning, which are amazing things that are going on right now. If it doesn't come back to people and how it can affect people, the data story isn't really being used to the best of its ability. A story with people in it that affects people, or even educates people, or allows people to function in a slightly different way, that's a story that's really bringing about change. Because often, as people, myself included, if a story isn't affecting people or about people, it's hard to engage with it. So in every story, whether that be data or fictitious, you really want to have that element where it's relatable, where you can understand it, and that's through its people-centric nature. And that's what I personally believe is the true key to forming a compelling data story, which not only brings about change, but is impactful in positive ways to society and further out, and is something that brings about innovation. So that is all I have prepared for today. And it was quite a quick session. if you were to use this QR code, you'd be directed towards my link tree, in which you can connect with me on Instagram. I have a Tosin Tech, which is my Instagram just for technical things, which is data centric and tech centric. I like to talk about everything going on there. And then we also have my LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect, I would be very willing to point some of you towards some good resources in terms of data and other things. I believe we have some questions. So, question 1. What did you use to make the presentation? It's so nice and sleek. I am the biggest advocate for Canva ever. PowerPoint is sometimes nice and you can have your templates, but for me and the way I like to present, I think Canva allows me to have that creativity. I would really recommend, it's free, so you can set up a free account. There's a Canva Pro, which has some extra features, but I just use the free one. It seems to do quite well. And it kind of lets you kind of have a little more freedom and creativity in terms of your presentations. And I think it's just a nice touch to have. So that's that question. Any other questions? How do I create visualizations? So there's a variety of ways that you can create visualizations. Like I mentioned earlier, there's Excel. Some people have exposure or have the ability to access other tools that create dashboards, which is just a fancy data term meaning a collection of visualizations. And those can be done on Power BI or Tableau. And for both, I believe you can get a free trial. So that's something that if you have some data sets you potentially like to play around with, and those are great for especially people who are just starting out in data. I think they're quite intuitive tools. So I would definitely recommend checking those out. I think there's also Ultrix, which has some very interesting abilities to do visualizations. I also like to code. So I have a lot of experience in Python, Java, and C. So I have the ability to code in Python using some of the Matplotlib and Seaborn libraries, which is something there are a lot of resources out there for. And I would very much recommend doing if you're into data or you're coding and you've passed the beginning stages and you're getting slightly more advanced. I would definitely look into getting able to visualize, because it's just a great tool, as I mentioned, in communication. So I would say that coding visualizations or dashboards, if that's something you're more inclined to do, because you don't have to code to be in data or tech. I want to dispel that myth immediately. So any other questions? I'm also very happy to wrap up. How did I get into my job? So Rockborn is a graduate recruiter kind of format. It's like a train and deploy. So you come in as a graduate. I came in from an engineering background, and then they train you up. So they give you the skills that you need to function in the data space, which is something that I very much appreciate. And I also, if you would like to directly message me about queries about getting graduate roles and stuff like that, I'm in the process of setting up some graduate role coaching, just because I feel like it is quite a hard process, especially coming out of uni. Nothing's quite like it, but with the right tools, you'll be right on your way. And I think this might be the final question. Having knowledge of Excel is necessary for data. Is having knowledge of Excel necessary for data science? I would say no, but it would be of benefit. A lot of Excel is quite an outdated tool, I won't lie to you, but a lot of big companies still use it because they used it years and years ago, and it's hard to migrate large amounts of data, especially legacy data. So I would say having a good basic understanding of Excel, you don't need to write macros or anything, but being able to just create some simple charts, and maybe also if you have the ability to use a pivot table, that's definitely advantageous. But yeah, I think that might be everything. I will be in the little meet and greet section later on. So if you guys have a lot more questions about either data, just having graduated, how I transitioned from like uni life to working life, or if you have any questions about just how being a young professional is, I would love to answer those. So yeah, I think that's it.